We left off in the last video here at regulating services about carbon sequestration and climate regulation. You hear a lot about carbon dioxide when we hear about climate change. And we see that nature pulls a lot of carbon out of the atmosphere and stores it, either in living things or the shells that living things use. And so it regulates the climate for us. This is a natural thing that the environment does. And that's really nice because without these things, we would have even more drastic changes with the climate. Predators regulate prey populations. Bats can be super freaky and most people don't like them, but they eat thousands of mosquitoes a night. And I hate mosquitoes much more than I hate bats. So they regulate those pest populations that we really don't like. Waste decomposition. Nature will break down feces, which is good because otherwise it would pile up and it would not be a good situation for us. Then again, with regulating surfaces, water and air purification, this is especially nice because we are putting so many different pollutants, synthetic chemicals into the water and into the air. And nature does an okay job at fixing those things for us. But I will say that it has a hard time keeping up with the damage that we do. Then finally, we've got cultural services, natural places that have cultural or religious importance, value and recreation such as ecotourism, therapeutic value also included here. So ecotourism is huge. People go around to these really cool places just to see them, to see these natural habitats, to see sea turtles at a reef, to see lions in the African savanna, zip lining in the Costa Rican rainforest. Okay. Ecotherapy is a thing. People with their busy lives in cities and whatnot get stressed. Getting out in nature has a huge impact on people's moods. And so it is actually now a legitimate treatment for some people. And here we've got an image of Mount Hakusan, sacred natural site to Shinto religion in Japan. And we've got lots of various cultures and religions that have sites like this that are super important to them. This looks at more ecosystem services here. This is a park in the UK where they went through and looked at the trees that exist in this park, 480 trees. That's not really that many trees. And they looked at the services that it provided. And they got a total value of 12.3 million euros. That's a huge amount of money. And this is looking at everything it does, removing carbon dioxide, picking up water, reducing flash flood risk, cleaning the air, and so on. So they calculated how much this was worth, and that's what they got. I will say that some ecologists warn against doing things like this, and this is where we get into that worldview where we've got pragmatic conservation versus that natural and aesthetic. Some people would say that under pragmatic, awesome, those trees can stay because they're providing this much money worth of services, which is worth more than the timber would be for cutting those trees down. And then others would say that they deserve to exist because they're there. Because the other side of that argument is if the timber was worth more, then we should cut them down. And we wouldn't do that under the aesthetic nature preservation view. This idea of biocapacity is the ability of an area to create renewable resources and to pick up waste and kind of regulate those things. Unsustainability occurs if the area's ecological footprint exceeds its biocapacity. So if we look at this image as it changes here, this is over time, and we see areas that are red are using way more resources than that area provides. United States, very red. We see lots of the Middle East is very red, and that's because they don't have a lot of natural resources. So they're going to be red pretty much no matter what. You look at Brazil, very, very green. And it's always very, very green because they have so many natural resources. They're simply not going to have ecological footprints that are greater than the biocapacity. But in areas that are resource poor, in areas that use lots and lots of resources, like the Western world, we see have this red, where it is unsustainable. Okay. Things that cause environmental problems. We've got population growth. The more people there are, the more problems we have. Using resources faster than they can replenish. Poverty. When we look at poverty, this is because they will impact the environment because they're just trying to survive. And so they can't think long term. Excluding environmental costs from market prices. So when you buy a good, it does not include the potential environmental damages the production of that good has had. And so there's essentially this hidden subsidy that exists with many of the goods that we buy. And then also increasing isolation from nature. Fewer and fewer people get out into the natural world. We don't see the impacts. We don't have that aesthetic worldview because we more and more live in cities. It is a very urban world now. Looking at sustainability, sustainable development. When we look at sustainability, this is using resources at or below their ability to regenerate. Okay. So this is avoiding depletion of natural resources in order to maintain ecological balance so the environment can survive. The United Nations produced these sustainable development goals for 2030, which is not very far away now. Very lofty goals, excellent goals. Will they be achieved? Unlikely. But it's great to move toward these things. Okay. Looking at sustainable yield, this is the maximum rate at which we can harvest something without reducing the total supply. Okay, and so here's our sustainable catch here for fishing effort. Underutilization, we're using less than they can sustain. We get our maximum sustainable yield, where this is the greatest number of, in this case, fish that we can catch without destroying that population. Then we get into overfishing and we start taking more than can be reproduced. And so populations start to decline. And this overfishing is what we see happening in most of the world right now. Environmental full cost pricing. Again, this is just goods don't include prices with their environmental impacts. The food you purchase, greenhouse gases that are emitted by planting, transporting the goods, fertilizer that ends up in natural waterways, loss of topsoil in industrial agriculture, none of that's accounted for. Most of those things are ignored when you buy your ear of corn. Okay? But when we look at full cost pricing, we look at all of those things. And basically what this does is this is going to increase the cost of goods, but it is also going to encourage sustainability because we're not going to have a lot of the waste if those goods now cost more. Global discrepancies in wealth and environmental impact. What we see is that as income increases in a country, they tend to do more environmental damage. This graph in the bottom left shows that typically our really poor countries don't have as large of an impact on the environment. And as they get wealthier, we have a larger and larger impact. But then as we get even more wealthy, we start to decrease that impact. And so we get this curve where these things change over time. We do see that 49% of the world's carbon dioxide emissions are by just 10% of the richest individuals. Huge difference in impact here.